The kantele, Finland's national instrument, is thought to be from 1,000 to 3,000 years old. It is a plucked 5 to 40 stringed instrument belonging to the Southeast Baltic Bach zither family.
Minä naiseni akkatelei, kiippuni sipseni kahvin se möi, virtsini täyteen lattia soi. Rikkana ristinä kaikissa oi, entä se rakkaus huimena hai, naisinko sittenkin ylläpä kai? Aamusta iltaan liikkuisten suu, yölläkin löistämä kylkeni luu. Neristen nälkä te hoitkisi voi, miksi mun luoja sun luoksesi toi? Hupsu se ukko ja poikasen nais, voisinko hupstunut ylläpä kai?
Kantele is both a musical instrument and it's also a symbol of Finnish culture and ethnicity that's been cultivated very strongly as a symbol over the past couple hundred years. And so the stories that are within the Kalevala, which is this literary epic based off traditional oral literature from Finland, tell that the hero Vainamoinen, who's the main character of the story, invents the kantele after being in this boating adventure with his people. They all go together in a big boat to go up north, and on their way there, their boat gets beached on a giant northern pike fish. And so it takes 3 different people to attempt to kill this fish. And when they finally do kill the pike, they butcher him up. Everybody has a shore lunch picnic on the beach. But he's looking at the jaw of the pike and he says, I could make something good of this. I shall make a kantele. And so he takes the lower jaw of the pike and he goes and he gets some hair of a kind of mystical creature known as the demon horse. And he uses those hairs for strings and he ties them to the teeth of the pike bone. And then he starts to play music and it's this beautiful dreamlike. You know, when you hear a kantele, it's this beautiful kind of ethereal, dreamy sound. And he starts to play. And all the creatures of the earth just stop what they're doing and come to listen. Birds kind of fall out of midair and land on the ground to find out what's going on. And after a while, people start peeking out of the woods. Even deities and guardian spirits from different realms come out to hear. In the end of Kalevala, when Vainamoinen does leave the people, he leaves the kantele for them and he says, there might be some time when I'm a useful person and so maybe you'll find me again, but in the meantime, I leave this as a gift to you, the people of Finland. And so that's the kind of mythological story of the importance of Kalevala and why we have it even. In the 1830s, Finland is going through this kind of identity crisis, you could say. They had been a part of the Swedish Empire for 600 years, and then they become a part of the Russian Empire until independence in 1917. And Finnish people were thinking about how they could stop having this Swedish cultural identity and how they could avoid having a Russian one. And it occurred to them that finally they should look to the old Finnish folk tales. They should look at Finnish music and etc. And this is when Kalevala and kantele especially become extremely important symbols. And so this is when people start to seek out kantele as this uniquely Finnish music that represents Finnishness and heritage. And so in the moment, you know, Vainamoinen leaves at the end of Kalevala and says, I'm leaving this behind, and if you ever need me again, I'll be here for you. And in some strange way, he does come back for the Finnish people when they do need him to help determine who the Finnish people and what their sound and what their culture will be.
Playing in the backwoods Finnish-American community of Tapiola in Michigan's Upper Peninsula is a retired kantele master, Melvin Kangas. Now in his 80s, Melvin has mastered the 36-string kantele, a very difficult lifetime undertaking.
When the kantele first started, it was associated with the Kalevala. The church looked down on it because of association with paganism and pagan rites. It was a sin to play kantele, and especially the music that went along with it. Those were certainly not from the Bible. They extinguished them, and they removed them from their homes and brought them into their bathhouses. And that's where they lay, and a lot of kanteles are found in bathhouses. And then a lot of them who were more zealous burned them. I love the way the Kalevala, is written, and it has influenced me. And I don't think it's pagan at all, but that's all right. But that's it, So this is called "Sä kasvot neito kaunoinen." You grew up, beautiful maiden, and. There's a style of a Finnish sauna, and so I painted it with the traditional Finnish colors. And why don't we go inside the sauna and look at it? This has a traditional cedar bench and the dipper and everything. I got them from Finland. And then the decoration around, I did that because they did that in Finland. This is a Salmisto and Heikkilä kantele. It was made for me in Finland. Martti Pokela, the kantele player, he said you need a iso kantele, which is a big kantele that has the keys on the left-hand side, so you can change what's called from sharps to flats. So they are now in the flat position, and they are at their lowest point. Now, when you raise them to the middle section, they are all in what's called natural position. Now, if you want to be a Hawaiian star guitarist, you could do. Okay, here is what's called the damper. If you didn't have that, and the little kanteles didn't have the carrying power that this 36-string kantele has, the first kanteles did not have this. So, for instance, it would all ring together. But the damper with its hinge right here, and also, of course, you can use it, and you have to find a special fingering. So you dampen with your fingers also. You can't be pressing this all the time. And so you have this unique sound which a guitar cannot produce. Because when you pluck a guitar string, it dies right away. But it's still going. But if you pressed it on a guitar, you wouldn't even have to go back with your finger. It would die right away because it does not have this big sound box and the depth of the gondola. That's what gives it the depth, and the wood that you use gives its individual sound.
In many cultures, musical instruments are used in a way to invoke, to mimic, sometimes to speak to natural forces and sounds. And
the sound of the gondola, it's like the Finnish woods. It's just something about the sound. It's just very different than any other harp. It just has a very wooden, natural, earthy Finnish sound to it.
Since I grew up with grandparents that were Finnish, and both sets of grandparents, and who uncles and aunts spoke Finnish and also English. And so the conversations when I was growing up were fluid between Finnish and English. Yeah, when I started school, I didn't know English. Well, the only songs I would know were in Finnish. So I sang Finnish songs, and I don't know if the children knew what I was singing about, but I sure did.
He had studied in Finland with Ulla Katajavuori.
So I went to her address and I rang the bell, and I had envisioned this Ulla Katajavuori to be very old, ancient. In fact, I pictured her as a lady with a lot of gray hair and in a nuttura, what's called a bun in the back of her head. And there comes this tall woman and striding just really fast, and she had a blue pantsuit on, and she was blonde, blonder than blonde. And she shook my hand and she says, "I'm Ulla Katajavuori." So she ushered me into her room, and where she had 2 gondolas, and I noticed that the lighting was perfect for her. She must have had theatrical experience, as far as the lighting was just right for her. And so she played on her gondola first of all, and I thought to myself, wow, what a beautiful sound. I was just spellbound, and she also then gave me reprinted all of the music that she ever had. She reprinted that for me and to take back to my home. One time I saw her on the street, and I said, "Hello, Ulla," and she just walked right past me with her head high up in the air. She didn't acknowledge that I was there at all, which I thought was really neat because she was the grand dame, and so why should she bow down to me? I found that very interesting. I didn't think it was negative feeling. I felt it was she had status, and she was going to maintain it.
Let me tell you a Melvin story. So Melvin is very opinionated, and I like opinionated people, and that works well for me. And he really doesn't have any patience for the 5-string gondola. Koivun Kaiku from the Twin Cities came up to play here at FinFest. I think it was 1986. And we were out on the grass, sitting out on the grass, and Melvin was there with his big gondola, and we were there with our 5-string gondolas, and of course being outside the weather, and they're terrible to keep in tune. 5-string gondolas are notoriously difficult to keep in tune. I don't think we played anything together, but he played, and then we played, and we were struggling, and he finally goes, bah, and walks away, and referring to the 5-string gondolas, not to us or our ability, but to the 5-string gondolas. So then fast forward 20 years, Ilon Kaiku was at a same performance over at Gloria Dei Lutheran Church. We were struggling with getting our intonation, getting our 5 strings in tune, and we probably had some 10 strings at that point too. And again, Melvin said, bah! So he respects us and what we're doing, but he just doesn't have the patience for the 5-string gondola.
I taught at Finlandia. I had a class of gondola students, but they were with 5-string gondolas, and I was not as proficient in that because that requires a different technique. Kay Seppälä is one of the students that I taught, but she has blossomed, and she has a group of students that play gondolas, but I think they're the smaller gondolas.
A very informal group. We gather not very often, but we just love to get together to play. I have taken lessons from Melvin, and he was very encouraging and very positive and very easy to learn from. He's an excellent teacher. But there's a lot of people in our community who have been interested in the gondola, and I would put that back to Melvin, that because of his influence in our cultural, Finnish-American cultural heritage here, people know what the gondola is, and they also know that the big gondola would not be that easy to play, and they're hard to come by. Whereas so many of these 5 and 10-string gondolas have been made available to us in our area.
I'd come across a 5-string gondola, which sounded beautiful, but I didn't know how to play it, so it just sat until the early 80s on public radio as I was driving to work in the VA hospital in Minneapolis. They featured Melvin Kangas playing a concert gondola, a few pieces, and I was so struck. So that was my come to Jesus moment, that gondola piece. A friend mentioned that. He said, well, I'm in a beginning gondola group, why don't you come and join us? And I don't know, I didn't feel I could just jump in. I had no knowledge of it, but you learn. So Joyce Hakala was the leader of that, and I had called her, and she said, "Oh, yeah, you have a gondola? Come over. I'll give you some lessons." And so after a few lessons, she said, "You should just join the Koivu Kaiku, because you'll learn as we go along." And so that was my real introduction to jumping in there and swimming with the group, with the music, and learning by listening and playing, and not necessarily by music, because I don't read music. Playing with them, doing small concerts and so forth. Got up to the UP, and so there I met Melvin Kangas in person, because he was at the festival performing. And the fact that we got asked to play here and there, I think, starting in Minnesota, it kind of had an awakening as far as good music and Finnish music.
My grandfather, my mother's father, was what was called a lukkari in the Apostolic Church, and there were 4 of them, I think, at that time. And they didn't allow an organ or a piano in, because the tradition was just the singing. But eventually, they got a piano. So I've been playing in church since the mid-70s. And I have this problem. I try to accommodate them as far as speed goes, but I'm not able to play as slow as they want. There are grumblings. You see, because they equate that with being reverent. And that is such a misconception, that you have to be slow to be reverent. So it's always been a problem playing in the Apostolic Church. Although I love the roots of the Apostolic Church, but I'm sort of a different aspect when I go there. At least I think I vitalize them. I think each hymn has a different tempo. It's not the same speed. Like, for instance, Shall We Gather at the River, I let her rip at the church where I play, and I really jam it, and it's not to be sung like, shall we gather at the river. Maybe that is one way of doing it, but shall we gather at the river, and so I really get into it, and they enjoy it in Pelkey. They would be shocked if I played it that way over there. The gondola has been growing up too, through the usage, and this newer, younger generation, in their 20s and, 30s, have explored more sounds that they can get from it. Electrified has come into the fore, so it expands the sound, and it can be played now in a big hall. So it has grown up. This child has grown up,
Melvin His legacy, too, like a lot of the people that we see in the copper country who maintain and share their traditions, is one that can't be underestimated. He's a magnificent performer, and what he leaves for us with his record of Kantele is a massive treasure.
I've known Melvin, or I knew Melvin for about 60 years. I think I probably sang with him at 30 or 40 Finnish funerals. And he accompanied choirs. He accompanied 3 of the musical plays that I put on. Over the years, I probably acted in about 8 or 10 of the plays that he put on. He taught music here off and on for 30 years as well.
I had been aware of him from some of his music events that I had attended here at Suomi College, Finlandia University back in the 70s, but I have a photograph somewhere of the 2 of us playing together at Laurie Anderson's house, probably around 1980. Melvin's playing his 36-string Kantele and I was playing a 12-string guitar. I sure wish that I knew what we sounded like. I wish that had been recorded, and I wish I could find that photograph.
I met Melvin back about 2004. I was an intern over at the Finnish American Heritage Center in graduate school. And that was back when Melvin's office was in the top floor of the Heritage Center. Flash forward 7 years, I started working at Finlandia. So I was in my office one day in Mannerheim Hall, and he was walking by my door one day, and I was listening to Finnish public radio while I was working. And he walked by the door, and then he did a backup walk and came back and got into my doorframe and said, "Finnish? That's not something you hear around here very much anymore." So it started our doorway conversations. Like if one of us ran into the other one in a doorway, we would just stop and talk for a while. And I started to realize then that he was this really important fixture in campus. I'd heard of Melvin when I was in high school up here, and, because it was Kantele performances, and I'd heard of him, at one time I was in the archive doing work, and I found this little clipping there about how he had performed his Kantele on the Today Show back around 1962 or so. And I was like, wow, that's unique. I mean, that's not something you hear about every day. I started just kind of learning more and more about these things that he did and seeing how integrated he was with the play and acting community around here. And so I was just impressed by what a Renaissance man he was and where he just keep popping up in these cool places.
It was a story that Melvin told me about when he was just a little boy out there, but he really wanted to learn to play the piano. I don't know how old he was, 8 or 9 years old, maybe less than that. But it turns out that his father was friends with some individual here in town who owned some of the theaters. And because he owned the theaters, he knew some of the Finnish traveling performers who would go across the country, like Viola Turpenen and so on. One of these people was Ernest Paananen, who was a Finnish immigrant that had been trained as a musician, a classical musician in Finland, and had immigrated to this country. I read somewhere that he had played in the Cleveland Symphony and also in the Seattle Symphony. But anyway, Ernest Paananen had come to town. He was here. And arrangements had been made for Paananen to come out to Ilo, to the Kangas farmhouse, to show young Melvin something on the piano. And Melvin was just beside himself. He couldn't wait. He would go to the window, he'd go to the door, he'd run down to the road, and he would look and look. And finally he said to his mother, "I'm going to go look for him." And he went running down the road. And sure enough, he found Ernest Paananen sitting on the bank of the road eating wild strawberries. And so he took him by the hand and dragged him down the road, and according to Melvin, that was his first lesson on the piano.
One time he told us about having, when he was a boy, taking piano lessons in Baraga. He would get a ride from a logging truck driver. Probably his father had arranged that. And he'd go down to Baraga and have his piano lesson and stay overnight at a relative's house in Baraga, and then come back the next day on the logging truck. The logging truck driver would let him off at the Otter Lake Road, and Melvin would walk home from there. I remember one anecdote from that time. We were down in the church basement, and we were practicing for the concert up there, he and I. And an old man came in from a neighboring parish, and he said, "I would like to sing a song at the concert tonight." And Melvin said, "You have the music with you?" The guy did not have his music with him. And so Melvin had him sing a little bit of it, and he figured out what the key was and how the melody went. And so Melvin was winging it. He had to wing it with this guy. And when we got upstairs and it was the guy's turn to sing, he didn't bother with the paper. He put it in some pocket or other. And he folded his arms like this, and he sang. First verse went fine. Second verse, he forgot. And he started looking around in all his pockets. And I was sitting near the front and on Melvin's side of where the piano was, and sweat was dripping off Melvin's forehead onto the keys. And he had, he was waiting, will this guy come back in on pitch? Where is he going to come back in? What do I do? And I think Melvin, when the guy fished the words out of the right pocket, he then somehow bailed them both out, and it went just fine. I remember one instance of Melvin's somewhat eccentric behavior. He was an accompanist for Paul Niemisto, who was, when Paul was in high school, he was an excellent trombone player. And the band director had chosen a piece by Paul Hindemith, a very hairy modern piece, and it was tough. And Melvin was able to accompany Paul in this thing. When they finished, the head of the Northern Music Department, Hal Wright, began to announce the next number. And as he proceeded with that announcement, there was chuckling in the audience. Wright began to wonder, what are they laughing at me? But everybody was looking past him. Melvin had wandered out on the stage with his back to everyone, looking up at the flies of the theater. And he went from the side of the stage about to center stage. And so Wright looked back there, and then he stopped, folded his arms, and began to chuckle himself. And Melvin was completely oblivious to where he was. And the chuckle from the audience turned into a roar. And Melvin turned around and made the most magnificent double take I'd ever seen. He was horrified and went skittering off the stage. And yeah, he was, that was Melvin all over, too. The people in Pelkey had great affection for him. They would invite him over for Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners and coffee afterwards. And he was kind of a pet of the congregation. They understood him perfectly. And that was a fine thing. It was a rural congregation. Not everybody in a rural area understands a Melvin, but they did.
You know, Dan alluded to the idea that Melvin was really embedded in his community out there. Elo, Tapiola, Pelkey. He always was completely knit into that community, it seemed. He really enjoyed taking his Gantley over to the Tapiola Diner on a Sunday afternoon and just playing dinner music. A person of this talent, this much talent and experience and so on, taking his instrument over to a little country diner, a little crossroads community diner, and just playing music just for the pleasure of it, so that the people having Sunday dinner at the diner would have some music.
But Melvin was a preservationist. That was his soul. He liked to keep things going that were in danger of extinction, things that were exotic. Luxury cars, for example, of all things, that surprised me. But yes, he would have one Cadillac or Lincoln dating back to the 30s or 40s, which he would have restored, and then he would sell again and look up another one from a catalog and get it. He had exotic chickens, many different colors, laying different size and different colored eggs. I think if he ever heard of a chicken that laid square eggs, he would have gotten that one too, and tried to breed it and sell it. I think he made a good part of his living from this kind of thing. Certainly from the exotic dogs that he raised. He was into Irish deerhounds, but he would go to deerhound lovers conventions wherever they were in the United States, and he would take one of his male dogs along to stand at stud for females in different parts of the country, for which he would collect a fee. But he did that as well. One of his preservationist impulses was to preserve Finnish American culture, and Finnish and Finnish American culture.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I am so grateful to Melvin about was that he was preserving the tradition of Finnish American amateur theater. Yes. This is something that I've read about. I never experienced it directly myself, except in my participation here with Melvin. I didn't know that he had any interest in theater until I think it was the 1985 FinFest. Was that the one that was here, 1985? And they did Kuparisaari Kultamaa, which was just a wonderful, wonderful theater production. And it was this combination of theater and storytelling and music that just entranced me. And then 2 years later, in 1987, Melvin recruited me to be in that show again when they were taking it to the Detroit Fin Fest in 1987. And I jumped at the chance, and it was one of the best performance experiences I've ever had. One of the interesting things about Melvin with his theater stuff, I don't know if he ever held open auditions. I think maybe he did at times, but he would also handpick people from the community. He would recruit them. There was originally music that Brecht had put into his first productions, but Melvin replaced the music.
Yes.
He brought in actual Finnish folk melodies and set the lyrics to these melodies, and he worked it out in such a way that they seemed to be entirely natural, and the songs were used as scene changes. I was really impressed, and then when I found out that Melvin had designed the set, I think he designed the set for Koperisaari Kultamaa too. That was the thing about him. He would do everything. If there wasn't someone else that he could rely on to do something, he would do it all. He would design the set, he would edit the script, he would recruit the actors, and then he would go over to the thrift shops and sometimes buy with his own money old clothes to costume his cast. He would do it all, and I admired so much his energy and his talent to be able to do that, and the way that he would put himself on stage. If there was any part that was not covered, he would do it, and it didn't matter what gender. One of his favorite things was to dress up as an old lady and get out there on stage and convincingly portray some old country woman. He amazed me.
He was doing a production of The Mikado. It's right before the performances are going to happen, and so we have the dress rehearsal days. I was in the art gallery, and Melvin came out of the theater room, and he was dressed in this full-length dress, just a long, gorgeous, skinny dress. And he had this just incredible kind of crown of some sort. It was almost like Art Deco, chinoiserie, it was just so stunning. And these massive, false eyelashes and just beautiful red lipstick. It took me a minute. I was like, wow, this is going to be a production. I was like, wow, that's Melvin Kangas, and it was so cool. He just, around here, people can kind of worry about doing stuff like that. And Melvin was just, no, I'm doing this. This is my thing, and I'm going to do it well and gorgeously. And just, yeah, I loved it.
I remember another incident like this when a Finnish cultural consultant was here from Finland, and she had written an adaptation of the play Tukkijoella in Finland. It was playing in Finland at the time, and she called it Lumberjack's Life, and she had all these romantic Finnish folk songs from ages ago, about 12 or 15 of them. And Melvin and Grace Spanberg, who was the choral director at the time, they played two pianos for this thing. It was kind of like an orchestra. Grace was a superb musician as well. At one of the last rehearsals, Melvin said, "Cast, get out of here for a half hour. We need an overture." And he and Grace put together an overture of which includes most or all of the songs that we sang. And Grace was a good enough musician that she understood what he was driving at. And she said she had never seen in her bachelor's education at Gustavus Adolphus, in her graduate education, she'd never seen somebody do something like that in a half hour. Later, Melvin came on one of her choir tours to play the Kantele. And so she arranged for Melvin to have a concert there all by himself. But she told Melvin, "You need a suit. Here's $300, go get a suit." And he went out and got a suit, and by this time Grace knew him well enough. Melvin was a bit of an eccentric. We probably all would have Melvin stories. And he, when he came on stage, she was chuckling back there because he had an ice cream white suit. Everything was white. The shoes were white. The socks were white. That's what he'd purchased with the $300.
Melvin did this extravaganza for the 1990 Fin Fest that was held up here, based on a part of the Kalevala. He called it the Song of Lemminkainen, and it told the story of the hero or anti-hero Lemminkainen from the Kalevala. The way that Melvin did it, and he did it intending it for a very large performance space, and it was the big old basketball gym over at Michigan Tech. He composed the music. He sat up in the control booth. Yeah, and he played his synthesizer, and he had a microphone, and he did some Kalevala type chanting and singing up there, and we just went about our business on the stage. Yeah, it was amazing. A couple of ladies approached me from the audience afterwards and said, "We are from Toronto. Where are you people from?" And I said, "We are all from here, in the Keweenaw, Copper Country. We're all locals." And they looked at each other. You know, they were really classy. And one of them said, "We were sure that you are from New York, or at least Toronto." I told Melvin that afterwards. He said he was very pleased. He was very pleased. One of the strangest things that I've ever done in performance was when he decided he wanted to do a production of At the Hawk's Well by William Butler Yeats. Yeats he was the Irish poet and playwright who had been really interested in Japanese dramatic arts. I'm still not sure that I quite understand what that play is all about, but it had such a mood of mystery and drama to it. And part of that was because of the music that Melvin composed. He and Robin Oy played I think, all of the music on kantele and flute, which was just a wonderful combination and sounded, you know, to my American ear, it sounded very Asian, very Japanese. He was very interested in adapting the sound of the kantele to any kind of music that he came across. I had run into him at some event somewhere, and he started telling me about this play, The Wolf Pair, Susipari, that he had seen it over in Finland at the Tampere Outdoor Theater. And he really wanted to do this play. And he had messed around with trying to translate it himself, and he said that he just couldn't get it right. And when I found out who it was by, Kalle Päätalo, I had been reading some of the novels by Kalle Päätalo that had been translated into English by Richard Imbola, who is another Copper Country native. And so I just mentioned his name. And Melvin got right on it. He got hold of Richard, so that by 1996, he had a complete English language script, and we were able to put that on at the 96 FinFest USA down at Northern, which was pretty well received. I think the only problem being that Northern Michigan University was doing a lot of campus renovation at that time, and a lot of the power lines were torn up, which meant that there was no air conditioning in the Forrest Roberts Theater. And the place was just sweltering. And it required me, in the character of Janne, to jump up on a table Seems like I'm always jumping up on tables with you in Melvin's place. I had to jump up on a table, and I was so almost faint with the heat that when I jumped up on the table one time, I was afraid that I was going to pitch forward straight into the audience. But Melvin had lots of cold water, and whenever I'd come off stage, he'd hand it to.
Michael Lokinen and I got the grant to make these films. And so we wanted to interview Melvin. It just, we were doing stuff on dance music and we were doing stuff on all these different traditional arts, and it kept coming back to Melvin. So we did convince him to interview him, and it was a beautiful August day, and he had us go to his house out in Tapiola. And I drove under this kind of, like it was a bower over the driveway almost. It was just kind of greenery, and you go into this clearing, and there's this beautiful fairy tale home there, just timber and just gorgeous, and these beautiful red buildings and flowers. And then this mythological looking dog comes out, comes walking out of the yard with Melvin behind him. And I was just thinking, this guy really is magic. I mean, he just really is. Being at his house, it was cool because like a lot of Finnish Americans I know, like, you see them out in the public and you kind of get to know them in a public sense. But then when you get to see their homes, you see just how integrated being Finnish is for them. And Melvin's was just like pure fairy tale, backwoods, tupa magic. You just felt like it was just so special to get to hear the kantele and to get to hear his stories and to just see like how he integrated all his Finnishness into his world. When I started teaching in 2013 here after FinFest and after all my work at the Heritage Center, that's really also when I saw how important Melvin was as a teacher. And so I've spoken to so many alumni who've had him as a teacher, either through like his kantele and his other music classes, but also when, students would perform in his plays too. And so it was really cool because he really, really integrated the community and the students together through acting. And these students were introduced to Finnish culture through, Halavuolijoki plays. It was just so cool to have them have these experiences of Finnish culture that wouldn't have happened if Melvin hadn't made it happen. And so I think, in my classes, I teach things like sociological classes and history and stuff like that, but I do always try to imbue a little bit of experience in what we do in the classroom. And I think Melvin really inspired me to do that because all the students who said, I learned this from taking this, I learned how to act. I can play a little bit of kantele still after 20 years, so I think those are the things I'll remember most about Melvin. I mean, he really was just a force. He was just so wonderful to see.
He added so much color, such color and such texture to our little community here. I'm very glad that he was in my life.
So that was Melvin, preservationist, musician, breeder of exotic animals. And now he's gone.
Mm-hmm.